Welcome to IN.HYPE Education. I'm Margarita, founder of IN.HYPE, a professional nail brand focused on safe, high-performance products and correct techniques. This lesson on product removal is divided into several parts. In the first video, we'll focus on the theory, which removal method to use and when, how much product should be removed, the most common mistakes technicians make, and how to work with different nail types. The second video is dedicated to the detailed e-file removal technique. I especially recommend it for beginners or for anyone who still feels unsure about filing off gel. It's very informative and breaks the process down step by step. In this video, we're going to talk about removing old product. And here's the most important thing to understand. The goal of removal is not just taking material off. The goal is to create a flat, even surface for the new application. And this smoothness of the surface should not come from a hand file and not from a buffer. It should already be smooth after using the e-file. When you leave the material uneven and bumpy and then try to fix it with a hand file and then buffer it again, imagine how much extra time you waste. It's much better to spend a little more time during the removal stage and leave the surface clean and even right away rather than struggling later with a file. So what should we focus on? Again, invest more time in proper removal instead of correcting mistakes afterward. Now, if you look at the image on the right, you'll notice a slightly white, cloudy area of base closer to the free edge. This means a bit more material was left there, but it's not critical. Why? First, because the main volume was already refined on top. And second, because this nail is very thin. In cases like this, aggressively thinning the free edge is not recommended. This is one of the few exceptions. Now let's talk about mistakes. We know how it should look, so let's focus on how it should not look. Mistake number 1, thick sidewalls. We intentionally show an exaggerated example here to make it clear. Nothing bulky or heavy should remain. The sidewalls must look slim, clean, and even. Mistake number 2, uneven surface from the side view. There should be no deep dents or obvious dips. These usually appear after smoothing, so always check the nail from the side and see if anything still needs refinement. Mistake number 3, and the most common one. Technicians leave too much material in the center of the nail, creating bumps and unevenness. And at the same time, they remove too much material from the free edge and the tip. Or the opposite, uneven removal between zones. This imbalance is one of the main causes of poor results during correction. Of course, if there are liftings, especially large liftings, the coating must be removed completely. About 99% of the material is removed with the e-file. Any remaining residue is refined with a hand file. But in this lesson, we're focusing on a different situation. A client comes in for a follow-up correction without liftings. Before you start removal, you assess the nail from all angles. You look at the nail plate from the top, then you turn the client's hand over and check the underside. I always check the underside of every nail first. If there are small micro liftings, for example at the corners of a square shape, and you're confident you can remove them later from the underside with a bit, that's acceptable. But if a lifting is spreading along the side wall and moving inward toward the growth point, the coating must be removed completely. This is not optional. In this case, we always do a full removal. For removal, carbide bits work best. Personally, I use carbide bits, either a Christmas tree shape or a cone. But to avoid unnecessary expenses, you can safely work with just one bit. A green grit carbide Christmas tree bit is enough. It allows you to remove the coating and also clean the underside. A comb bit simply won't work well on the underside, especially on short nails or nails that curve strongly downward, where you often have to remove almost the entire natural nail thickness from the inside. Removal should be done at high speed, 30 to 35,000 RPM. At this speed, the bit works smoothly. It doesn't skip, and it doesn't overheat or burn the client. How much material should you leave? This always depends on the nail architecture you are working with. Now let's talk about downward growing or hooked nails. Sometimes the nail plate itself grows straight, but as the free edge gets longer, it starts to curve downward. In this case, we remove the entire volume of the grown-out apex that has shifted toward the free edge. Our goal is simple. We create a flat surface. We remove the apex, and we remove a small amount of material from the stress zone. Why do we do this? So that old apexes and bumps don't interfere later when we are building correct nail architecture. At the same time, we leave all the material on the free edge. This saves your time, it saves the client's time, and it saves product. If there are no liftings, we leave the entire volume of old material on the free edge. As shown in the diagram, we remove volume from the apex, and from that point forward, all free edge material is preserved. If there was no color, you can lightly refine it with a file. If there was color and top, remove them gently with a bit using soft movements. Now the second case, hypertrophic nails. Here, not only does the free edge curve downward, but the nail plate itself is excessively convex with a high longitudinal arch. In this situation, we still leave all the material on the free edge, but it's no longer possible to create a perfectly flat surface. If you try, you'll simply overfile the natural nail. So instead, you remove as much old material as possible from the nail bed area, you clean it completely, and you still leave the material on the free edge. Now let's move on to straight nails. Here the technique is very similar. We create a flat surface. We remove the grown-out apex that has shifted toward the free edge, and we remove a small amount of material from the free edge, but not completely. Unlike downward growing nails, where we leave the entire free edge, on straight nails we reduce it slightly. We also lightly refine the side areas. This step is extremely important. Now upward growing or ski jump nails require a slightly different approach. Again, our goal is to create a flat surface to make future architecture easier. These nails often don't just grow upward, they're also concave. In the concave area, we leave material, and we level it out to create a straight line. This way, we don't have to refill that dip with gel later. That means less work, less time, and a faster service for the client, which clients always appreciate. So on upward growing nails, we remove the grown out apex and remove material from the free edge. Whenever possible, we leave the sidewalls. Sidewalls will need to be rebuilt later anyway, because these nails grow upward. But if the sidewalls were properly built during the previous correction and there were no liftings, we keep them. Apex removed, material removed from the free edge, sidewalls preserved. The nail is now fully ready for a new coating. First, let's break down the structure of the E-file bit and the working zones of the bit. The first part is the cheek. This is the section of the bit starting from the tip and extending to the beginning of the rounded area. The cheek is mainly used to work around the perimeter of the nail plate. Next, we have the belly. This is the part of the bit we use to work in the central zone of the nail. You may not have thought about this before, but gel removal usually combines two processes: removing thick, volumized material and removing thin layers. At the beginning of removal, there is almost always volume, except in rare cases where a client comes in with a one-step gel polish, where base, color, and top are combined in a single thin layer. In that situation, I would not recommend mechanical removal at all. It's much easier and safer to soak it off with an acetone-based remover. However, if soaking is not an option, for example, if the client cannot soak, or if we are already working mechanically, then we remove everything using the E-file. The first step is always removing the bulk of the material. Our goal is to eliminate as much volume as possible. Only after the volume is removed do we move on to working with the thin layer. Pay close attention to the direction of your movements. When removing bulk material, we work from top to bottom. This is because the cutting edges of the bit are designed so that when we pull the bit toward ourselves, it layers and removes material smoothly. When we switch to thin material, our task changes. Now we need to smooth and refine the surface, so we no longer work top to bottom. Instead, we work across the nail plate, not lengthwise. When working with thick material, we always start at the apex. As the nail grows out, the apex shifts forward, so we place the bit directly on the highest point, the hill, and pull it toward ourselves. If you try to dig into the material with pressure, especially as a beginner, you'll create dense and uneven pits, often called a Swiss cheese effect. That's why we always place the bit at the apex and pull, again and again, smoothly. It's also important to understand a basic rule of physics. The smaller the contact area between the bit and the nail plate, the faster the removal happens. That means when you're working closer to the tip of the bit, you must work without pressure. Otherwise, the bit will dig in too aggressively. Use smooth, controlled movements. At high speed, the bit already works very efficiently. The areas that suffer the most are usually the sidewalls. Later, technicians wonder why clients develop onycholysis, why the growth point shifts, or why corners chip and break. This happens because too much material was removed. Be especially careful around the sidewalls. The coating there is always thinner than in the center. In the central zone, when there is clear volume, it's safe to apply pressure using the belly of the bit. Press, pull toward yourself, and work confidently there. Now, let's talk about the order of removal. Look at the diagram. We always start with the rib. The rib is the transition area between the central zone and the sidewall. The first movement is made with the cheek of the bit along this transition. Why is this important? After 1 or 2 passes, you immediately see the true volume of material, both on the sidewalls and in the center. This helps you understand how much pressure to use in each area. If you see that the central zone is overloaded with material, you can safely increase pressure there. After that, we finish working the sidewalls, then move to the belly of the bit and work the central zone. The center is the easiest area to work with, even for beginners. When working in the center, always look straight down at the bit. You must clearly see where the bit touches the nail and what trace it leaves. Many beginners look under the bit, and that's a mistake. Next, we move to the corners. Make sure you're working either with the cheek or the belly of the bit, never with the very tip, as it can catch under the free edge. Then turn the client's hand and work on the sidewall using a pulling motion, as if you're dragging the bit toward yourself. These 4 steps are all about thinning the coating and removing the main volume. You should reach a point where the sidewalls look slim, the center has no excess material, and the underside is not overloaded. Only after that do we move on to smoothing. If the architecture still looks heavy or bulky, pause and reassess. Always remember what a natural nail should look like. Once the main volume is removed, we begin the smoothing stage. Smoothing means working with thin material, moving across the nail plate. We start in the center and follow the natural arch of the nail. Imagine gently stroking someone's hair. That's the type of motion we want. Now let's talk about liftings. Liftings should always be addressed last, never first. Only after the surface is thinned and smoothed, when only a thin layer remains, do we work on liftings. Once you clearly see the lifting boundary and understand exactly where it is, only then do you remove it. Liftings at the free edge usually detach on their own during smoothing, but liftings on the side walls or in the center require thinning the edges around them. Think of the bit like a small hammer. Use either the belly or the cheek of the bit and gently thin the area around the lifting. Never work top to bottom directly into the lifting. This will cause the bit to dig underneath and damage the natural nail. Now about shortening length with the e-file. You can do this before removal, after removal, or even when there's no product at all. The key points. Hold the client's finger firmly, hold the e-file securely, and work with the belly of the bit. Start from one corner. The handpiece must follow the curve of the nail arch, not move straight sideways. This prevents sudden impacts at the end and keeps both you and the client safe and comfortable. You'll see this clearly in the demonstration video.